Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday Market Snapshot for the Ottawa real estate market for Monday, July 22nd, 2024. My name is Annalie Rice. I'm a realtor here in Ottawa, Ontario, and every week I bring you the details of what's going on in the Ottawa real estate market. Let's see what's happening. Okay, so citywide, let's look at the stats. We've got a little bit of a decrease in the number of active listings this past week. Mostly it's in the detached and towns, and we actually have a little bump to the condo active listings right now. The sales this week were down as well. Last week was sort of a bit of a bump up after the long weekend, the July long weekend. So this week we dropped back down, which is kind of normal with summer slowdowns and such. So you can see that the sales decreases were in the detached and towns market, and the condos actually bumped up a little bit. Okay, so this is the graphic version of the inventory breakdown. So we've got the overall inventory in black at the top. You can see that we kind of peaked about a month ago on that, just leading into the long weekend in July. The active inventory also peaked just before the July long weekend and has sort of settled out, and it's probably on a little bit of a downswing unless the market perhaps picks up a bit, then more sellers might think that it's a good time to sell. You can also see the conditionally sold in orange and the sold properties in red. And the little dashed lines depict sort of where we were at the same week last year. You can see how much more inventory, that's the two horizontal lines near the top. Lots more inventory this year than last. And then the sales are about the same as they were last year at this time. Okay, so this is the new listing breakdown. So we had 416 properties that were listed this week. We had 126 of those were relisted properties, and 290 were new to the market properties, new to the market listings. So the breakdown was 70% new properties and 30% relisted properties. Now I am going to take this slide just to talk about, just because I need to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about whether or not I think things might shift a little bit or be affected by the Bank of Canada overnight lending rate announcement, which is going to happen on Wednesday. So if you recall, in June, we did see a quarter point drop in the interest rates, and that somewhat directly affects the people who have variable rate mortgages, which there's obviously not many people getting those right now, but it doesn't directly affect people who are getting the fixed rate mortgages, but it does affect people's sentiment. And a quarter point didn't really do much, but it was a signal that there was potentially a change coming in the longer term. And it takes a while for things to take effect. But this week, if they again drop it, it's possible that there could be a change in sentiment of the market. And last month, we saw a bit of a pause before the interest rate announcit's. People were like, oh, I wonder if it's going to go up, it's going to go down. Is it going to make it worse or better for me? And the same thing could happen again this week. And it's a bit of a pause. Sales were down a little bit. But it's possible that after, if they do drop it, that there could be a bit of a bump again in sales and new listings, and people are just a little bit more optimistic about the market. So that could put a little bit of a wrench into our normal summer slowdown. And if they do continue, the next interest rate change would be in September, and then that could spur on something in the fall to sort of recover our 2024 housing market, which has been fairly slow. Anyways, long discussion. I hope if you have any questions, let me know on that. Okay, so we had 213 sales this past week, which was obviously down from last week, which I mentioned before. Of those properties that sold this week, we had 15% of the properties sold with no condition. So that was a bit of a drop, and we can definitely see that trend is coming down. And 32% of the properties sold at or above asking, which is actually a fair bit of a jump. Brings us back up to sort of where we were throughout the most of this year. When we look at how many properties are selling within the first 7 days on the market, we had only 9% of the sales this week. It was 20 properties sold within 7 days of being on the market. 40% of those sold with no conditions, which was down by 13%. So likewise with the other, overall, it dropped. And 70% were at or above asking price, which was about the same as what we've seen in weeks past. For sales within the first 30 days being on the market, 51% of the properties that sold were on the market for 30 days or less. That was 109 sales. So that overall average has been decreasing over time. I think we were up at around 60%, 70% a month or two ago. So that's definitely starting to come down as more properties are on for longer. 12% of those sold with no conditions, which is below the overall average, which is kind of a weird one. And 51% of those sold at or above asking price, which is fairly high. And it was up by 18% as compared to last week. So when we look into the at or above asking with a little bit more detail, we had 68 sales that were at or above asking price this week. 40 of those, which was 59%, sold at asking or just up to 1% over asking, which is a little bit lower than the percentage normally. 35%, or 24 homes, sold between 1 and 5%. That's a bit bigger of a jump. Normally it's not that high. And only 6%, which was 4 homes, sold for more than 5% over asking price. And if you recall, the last few weeks, there were properties that had sold for close to 30% above asking price. This week's highest over was only 12% over asking price. And it was also the same for the dollar amount over asking. It was $101,000 over asking. It was a 3-bedroom semi-detached in Wellington Village, which is a fairly sought after area. It was listed at $869,000. And it sold for $970,000. So just perhaps there were a few people that all wanted that house, or it was an awesome house in a really good area. But yeah, none of these 30% over, which was great. Next, we'll look at what's going on in the specific areas of the city, because sometimes the differences are quite stark of how much inventory is in different areas of the city. Okay, so in the central urban area, which is inside the Greenbelt, we have a bit of a mixed bag there. We have a drop in the inventory for detached and towns and a slight increase for condos. And then the sales were down a little bit for detached and condos, but up slightly for townhomes. In Canada and Stittsville to the west there, we have quite a lot of inventory. You can see that the detached and towns inventory is very high. A slight decrease overall this week for detached, down by 4, steady on the townhomes, and slightly down also for condos. Sales were down for detached and townhomes, most significantly for those towns, and slightly up for condos. And that's, I would say, a fair number of sales for Canada and Stittsville, with 7 sales this past week. Okay, in Barrhaven and Riverside South, it's kind of like the 5s. It's up by 5 for all the detached towns and condos for inventory this week, and sales were down for detached and towns and steady for condos. Just commenting, like, that's a lot of condos for sale in Riverside South and Barrhaven. 62 in a suburb is a fair amount. And in Orleans, we have a drop in the inventory for detached homes, a slight increase for townhomes, and then a drop, fairly significant drop there, 6 for condos in Orleans. For sales, they were down for detached and towns, but you can see an 11 condos sold this week, which was up by 11 because last week there were 0 sales of condos in Orleans. Okay, so this is the full data for the detached. I typically flip through these so quickly and don't really talk about them, but I like to look at these. If you look at the conditional column there, you can see how many properties are conditionally sold, and then you can compare it to the number that are sold this week, and you can see whether or not you can sort of estimate whether or not there's going to be more sales in a certain area. So like if you look down at Orleans there's 22 conditionally sold right now, but there was only 12 this week that sold. So next week I would expect that the sales are going to jump up in Orleans for the detached market. The opposite would be for Barrhaven, Riverside South. They only have 5 conditionally sold, and yet there were 10 sales. So that either means that sales are happening with unconditional offers or very quick conditional periods, and then maybe you don't, there could still be more than 5 sales next week, but there also could be fewer sales in Barrhaven and Riverside South next week. Okay, so this is for the townhomes. You can see that it's pretty steady. The numbers aren't significantly different from conditional to sold, but you can see quite a big difference between the days on market, cumulative days on market for the ones that are listed actively. You know, there's 50s and 60s, 40s down in Barrhaven, Orleans, but then you can see that the sales are mostly happening at 30 or less days. So places that are sitting on the market are just sitting on the market. Those that are coming on and selling quickly are pulling down the sold um, days on market average. And finally, the same data for the condos, which typically there are a lot more conditionally sold than sold, just because there are almost always conditions for sale of condos for review of documents and such. Okay, so that was your update for this week and a bit of a ramble on my sort of thoughts on the Bank of Canada rate announcements and how that could or could not affect things moving forward throughout the summer and potentially the fall. I hope you have a fantastic week and are enjoying your summer. See you later.